Thank you again for joining us for another Beam conversation. I'm joined by Beam Business Development Manager, Michael, and the Risk Project Manager for the Payday Super Project, James. It's a bit of a mouthful. I'm going to have to get you to explain what that is straight off the bat, James.
Yeah, sure. So there's a lot of changes coming for Payday Super for employees, but also for super funds. So we've got a big project and program of work we're doing, and my role is to manage the risk and compliance of that project.
So the core of what we're going to be talking about today,
Exactly.
We're very lucky to have James here who has joined us from the ATO, and we are going to go through some burning Q&As about Payday Super. Shall we? We'll just dive straight in.
Let's jump into it.
Maybe let's talk a little bit about your experience in the ATO then, James. Like, what was some stuff that they were talking about pre you joining here? I guess you were there right as they announced Payday Super,
I was part of the Payday Super program, ending as the director there. So I was involved heavily in sort of the development of the Payday Super legislation and SG charge. So that's why coming to Australian Retirement Trust to help our employers understand those changes was something I was excited to do.
What was the motivations in the ATO to get this done? What's been the burning thing for them?
For the ATO, it's all about unpaid super. So they have something called the SG gap, which is their measure of how much super guarantee employees don't get paid by their employers each year. And at the moment, it's over $5 billion is the estimate. So Payday Super from the ATO's perspective is all about making it easier for them to identify and collect unpaid SG from employers.
Before we dive into the Q&A, Michael, what are some sentiments you think you're getting from your clients and from customers, from the payrolls and the employers? What's the sentiment and the feeling towards the ATO and this change?
Yeah, look, there's a lot of opinions from, you can imagine, from one end to the other. I think one of the biggest things we've actually noticed is that a lot of people still aren't aware of a lot of the changes and announcements that have been made. And, it means that they're going to have lots of issues if they don't get some access to some information very soon.
One of the things we know a lot of people aren't aware of, and it's probably our first burning question, is why are they closing the Small Business Clearinghouse?
Well, I think it's an administrative burden for the government as a start, given that there's a whole bunch of other specialist clearinghouses out there, including Beam, and it means that they can focus on other parts of their technology and solutions that they have. The closing of the the Small Business Clearinghouse is going to be a big issue for them and a big issue for customers. There's a lot of customers still currently using that, and obviously they need to be able to find a solution between now and the 1st of July to, make their super contributions.
So what's the deal with the clearinghouse closing, James? It's from last year they can't have any new clients, no new customers on it, and from 1 July it's gone.
It's fully closed. So yes, of October last year, no new registrants. Current users can still use it, but that's only up till 30 June this year. From 1 July, they won't be able to access it. And your last quarter is not due till 28th of July. So probably the big call out to his employers using that clearinghouse, don't wait until 30 June to try and make your last quarterly payment. Try and work out what your new world and the way you're going to be making payments through clearinghouses is going to look like before we get to Payday Super in 1 July.
So realistically, the deadline is actually sometime like mid-financial year Q3, so that you can make your final payment and then switch onto your new platform, because you won't be able to make the Q4 payment using the clearinghouse. Is that right?
You will still be able to make it, but you got to make it earlier than you usually would have.
Right, okay.
Probably one big difference as well is with the ATO's clearinghouse, it actually had a special exemption that your contribution was deemed as being paid when the clearinghouse received it. That's not the same for a non-ATO clearinghouse. It's actually when it hits the super fund. So a lot of people are used to just waiting till the 28th of the month and then making their payment and meeting their obligations. They're going to have to start thinking about paying it early so they can make sure the money is received by that super fund by the due date to actually be complying under Payday Super without that ATO clearinghouse there.
So do you think that there's enough technology in the private world, software companies providing clearinghouse technology to support this gap, this platform closing? Is there enough to fill that gap?
Oh, look, I believe so. I don't really have absolute data to be able to support my comment there, but the market has got a rich number of suppliers in clearinghouse services and superannuation funds who have their own portal to be able to be accessed. So I have a belief that there is enough out there. I think the only thing that really the challenge for a lot of people who have been using the clearinghouse is that a lot of the small businesses currently use credit card for a lot of their payments. For most of the other services that are out there, credit card's not a method of payment, so they're going to have to get used to potentially making another payment method.
Okay. I mean, one of the other burning questions that we know is being asked a lot is about this grace period or potentially them delaying fees or penalties for the year. Do we have any whispers about that, James? Do we know anything more?
So I usually try and push back when people talk about a transition period or a grace period, because what the ATO has done is released something called a practical compliance guideline. What it is a description of how the ATO is going to direct their compliance resources. Essentially saying we're not going to use our resources to investigate employers who we think fall into a low risk category, who are trying to do the right thing. The caveat there is the ATO actually doesn't have the power to ignore unpaid SG if they become aware of it. So they're saying we're not going to spend our money to look, but if they get a complaint from an employee or some other reason they identify an employer who is low risk in their category but has an SG underpayment, they are required by law to actually assess that employer. So my recommendation to all employers is to not rely on this grace period. Try and do as much as you can to fall within their low risk category, which is make sure you move to paying super on payday from 1 July. And when you get any rejected contributions back from your clearinghouse or your super fund, make sure you act on those as soon as possible. That's the only guaranteed way to try and avoid the ATO doing an audit or assessing you for SG charge.
But realistically, that you just need to try and do the right thing, right? Like
you need to do the right thing. There's no grace period. There is no 3 months of you to get it right. It's a hard date. These are employees' entitlements.
Yeah.
The government's not allowed to say, don't worry about it for 3 months. From 1 July, you as an employer have to make sure that you try and pay on payday. What the ATO is really saying is they're going to focus on the people who aren't trying. And so especially employers who are just not paying their super at all, that's going to be the big focus compared to employers who might be paying a little bit late.
Yeah, okay. And I mean, we spoke cash flow briefly and we said credit card payments. What do we know about methods of payments? Do we know, is there any announcements or information about how people could potentially pay this money quicker and sooner?
Yes, so that's probably the biggest change for the payment world for super under Payday Super is the introduction of new payment platform. A lot of funds already accept new payment platform. So that's your OSCO payments, your real-time payments. So the advantage of that is that it clears with the recipient almost instantly. Compared to something like direct debit, it can take up to 3 business days for that money to clear with the clearinghouse and then the super fund. So by moving to a new payment platform's payment, which is usually by EFT, you can make sure that payment moves across the system faster, and that's going to help you meet that 7 business day time frame. Because I've said this a lot of times, what we need to make employers understand, it's not about when you pay on payday. What the law says is the money must be received by the super fund by 7 business days after payday. So making sure you can speed up the transfer of that money across the system to the super fund is one of the best ways to make sure you meet that time frame.
Do you think like us and other industry players are ready to do that yet?
Look, I think it's going to be a challenge for everyone in the market. And I think it's because things aren't necessarily settled yet in relation to some of the rules, some of the regulations. We're still getting updates all the time, and that makes it very difficult to be able to just settle on a solution and say, okay, that we're working towards that. So I think there's lots of challenges for all in the industry at the moment to meet some of these changes by 1 July.
I mean, I guess tying back into that grace period concept that there isn't one, but again, we should all just be collectively working towards the best solution possible and trying to meet the requirements to the best of our ability. And if we do that and take care of our employees as employers should be, we're unlikely to find any trouble with the ATO. That's kind of what I'm hearing, right? I'm not.
That's right. So the ATO is going to be focusing on employers who are not doing the right thing or not taking the effort to try and do the right thing. Employers, small businesses who are trying to do the right thing, things go wrong outside their control. The ATO is not going to put those resources towards looking at those employers. That's probably the key takeaway. So recommend people go read the practical compliance guideline. It's on the ATO's website. That explains the 3 categories of what they consider to be low risk, medium, high risk. They've got scenarios for each. See what you can do to make sure that you're going to fall into that low risk category.
I just have this vision of like a crack SWAT team running around arresting payroll officers for not being compliant in that high risk management area.
I think the message there is that you just have to, even if you miss some deadlines, make sure you do pay your super contributions. Don't wait to get a notice from the ATO. It's best to get all that in so that you can reduce any potential penalties that may come.
Yeah, that's right, Michael. That's probably the biggest change from under the SG charge is that previously, if you paid late, the advice from the ATO is don't pay to the super fund, lodge a statement and pay that money to us. Under Payday Super, they're changing that. And the call to action is if you realize you didn't pay an employee super on time, your first point of call should be pay that money now. So always, if you identify a problem, pay the employee super first, then you can work out what you need to do with the ATO.
So I suppose it's a question of not if you're going to be fined by the ATO, it's just how much, and how late you are realistically is going to dictate that.
That's right. And so the way that the ATO and Treasury have developed this SG charge is if you're doing the right thing, you're coming forward to the ATO with a voluntary disclosure early, you've never been default assessed by them, which happens during an audit, you're actually only going to be paying the amount of super that you didn't pay, and then a small amount of interest to make up for the period of time where the money wasn't in that member's account to make up for lost investment earnings. So the actual difference might actually only be a couple of dollars on a contribution, rather than in today's world where we've got these sort of Part 7 penalties that can be 200% and can really blow out the penalties an employer is going to pay. So as long as you're doing the right thing, you pay your late super as soon as you can, the likelihood is your assessment from the ATO is probably not going to be much more than what you would have paid to the super fund anyway.
So I guess like an example of that would be if I was a small business owner and I'm waiting for a supplier to pay their invoice and I don't have the cash to pay my employees SG for that period, for the fortnight for their pay. What you're suggesting is don't wait for the note from the ATO saying that you've missed it. Just pay it as soon as you can.
That's right. And probably don't even wait to realize that money's not coming in for you to pay your employees. You should be looking at your cash flow now. You can't wait till the end of the quarter to put it on a credit card anymore. With Payday Super, whatever your payroll cycle is, weekly, fortnightly, you need to make sure that money's there. So make sure you can review your cash flow, work out what the worst case scenarios are with how your cash flow works, and get ready for 1 July because it's coming.
Because that's not going to be like an exception or we will allow you to not pay that one because you didn't have any cash in the bank. It's just pay it on time as quickly as possible.
That's right. So these are employee entitlements, from the government's perspective that just because a supplier hasn't paid, that doesn't mean the employee can't get their super, which is part of their salary and wages.
Is there anything changing about refunds or about the way the money will come back to you that people need to know about?
There's an improvement in our error messaging. So under SuperStream, currently we send back a error response with the money back to an employer from a super fund, and they're going to improve the messaging in that error. So it's going to give that employer more information about why it was rejected to help them correct it and get it sent back through. When we're talking about refunds for sort of accidental payments and administrative errors that result in money going to a super fund, you're trying to get it back. Unfortunately, there's no changes at the moment that we can see. It's still in a world where super funds tend to have different processes. They need a lot of documentation for them to know that a condition of release has been met for that super fund to release the money back to that employer. So you'll have to, with any sort of refunds and adjustments with super funds, it's probably going to follow the exact same process as it does today. Things like stat decks need to be provided for that super fund to release the money back to that employer where they've done an accidental overpayment.
And SuperStream is the thing that connects Beam to all of the other payroll, all of the other superannuation funds out there. But I know, Michael, we've updated our messaging to users. Is that right?
We're in the process of updating it. So SuperStream 3 version 3 is what brings that alive for Payday Super. And so there's a whole bunch of new changes that are in there, including incorporating the NPP that James just talked about and the refund messaging, so that the refund messaging is much clearer than what it is now. So currently under version 2, there's not a specific requirement to have a standardized message. Under version 3, there's a standardized message so that someone can easily pick up and identify why that was refund or the rejection was done, so that they can actually make the next payment during that time frame, that time cycle that's necessary.
Because in the previous version, it would just say there was an error, but it wouldn't tell you what the error was, right?
In some cases, and it was up to the super fund to actually just help describe that. So not all super funds would give you a very rich response to why that was rejected, and you have to actually dig and ring up and find out reasons. Now you'll be able to see the exact reason.
It's like bank error in your favor, collect $20, but
Yes.
you don't really know what the error was or if
right.
it's your $20 to collect. Yeah, okay. What about, I mean, some other specific examples that we hear about, in questions that people have? Casual workers, for example. Is there any changes to the way that we pay a casual worker their superannuation?
There's probably no changes to the actual, like, is the casual employee required to receive super and when's it due? They're the same as everyone else, but it is going to give a lot of more administrative burden to those employers that have that sort of itinerant workforce or a lot of casuals who are joining and leaving, because they're changing the way that onboarding is working. So employers are reliant on an employee to provide them their super details. And oftentimes we see it today where the employee might not give the right details to the employer. USI, sometimes they get the unique student identifier from an 18-year-old instead of the super fund identifier. So issues like that don't get identified today until the employer tries to pay. And they get a rejection from the fund saying, I don't know who this member is. So what the ATO is doing under SuperStream is there's this new interaction. It's called a member verification request. And I like to think of it as a handshake between the employer and the super fund before they send any money, to say, I've got this person who says they're a member of your fund. Are they a member? And will you accept a contribution from me? And the super fund will respond either saying yes or no. If it says no, you need to go back to that employee, get the right details. If the employee doesn't give you the right details by the time you need to pay super, that's when you need to create a default account and pay into that. If the super fund come back and says, yes, I know who that member is, then the employer's got certainty that when they get to their payroll and they go and pay to that fund, the fund's going to accept that contribution, allocate it to the member's account.
This handshake, are we talking days, weeks? How long does this interaction take?
So the ATO has put a cap on how long super funds have to respond, which is 24 standard hours. I think in reality, most super funds are going to be doing it in near real time. But how each super fund does it and how each digital service provider or payroll provider displays that to the employer and pulls that data down is all up to the individual software provider.
So it's essentially pre-validation then, right, Michael? That Beam was already pretty comfortable across. We're just saying, yes, this person is legit. Their details are real. They are a member of that fund. And if we pay you money, you're going to receive it.
Exactly right. And that's the beauty of Beam, and has been the beauty of Beam since it was developed, that it does that validation process. So it enables people to understand very quickly whether a contribution can be processed or not. And so that technology for us already exists today, and that's obviously we built upon for the Payday super changes.
So another burning question people are going to have is, in the hiring of a new employee, what if they just give you the wrong details? Or what if they don't have details yet? What if it's their new job, first job ever?
Yes, it's going to be a big change. So I might start with the things that's not changing. The choice of fund obligations. You still have to give that employee a choice of fund form. That's where they're going to give you that incorrect information. So the good news is that you do get an extended due date for your SG. So usually it is 7 business days from the day after payday. For a new employee, it is 20 business days from the day after payday. And that's from their first payday. And so that gives the employer more time to collect that choice of fund details from the employee. Now, what happens if they use that 20 business days, they use the information the employee provides, and then the contribution comes back as rejected? Well, the employer is going to have to go back to that employee to try and get updated details. But if the due date is coming up and the employee hasn't responded yet, the employer has to pay some sort of SG into a super fund for that member to be able to meet their obligations. So in that scenario, they're going to have to create a default account to pay into. So that's why they've got that extra 20 business days to try and make sure they can do that interaction and identify it before, because we don't want to be creating more accounts. But there is no exemption for employers that the employee gave me the wrong information. So if the worst comes to worst and you're about to become liable for the SG charge, then employers, they're going to have to create a default account.
But Beam has made it relatively easy for you to check if they've got an account already. Like, we have the ability to pre-validate information. We definitely don't want to be getting to a point where employers are just default automatically opening a new fund every time they employ someone, right? That's definitely not the message.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's definitely part of the benefits of Beam, that pre-validation process. It does save a lot of time.
And this is where the stapled fund account process also comes in. So in that, employers, when the employee doesn't provide you their details, the first thing you should be doing is using that stapled fund process. And the ATO will let you know if an account exists that you can pay into that. It's only when the employee is giving you no details or wrong details and the ATO can't give you a stapled fund, that's when your last resort is create that default account.
What if I gave you details for a super fund and it shut down?
Yes. So let's say you're 6 months in, suddenly the contributions start getting rejected. The way the legislation's been written is that will also give you an extended due date. So anytime you need to pay into a new super fund, so whether that be a successor fund transfer because the fund's shut down, maybe it was a self-managed super fund that's become non-complying, the employer is going to have 20 business days from that last payday that got rejected, where the super fund had closed or you can't pay into it anymore, to be able to obtain the new super fund details from that employee. And if the employee doesn't provide them, same process again. Request stapled fund details from the ATO and pay there if they're provided. If they're not, then you can create a default account for that employee.
So it's the employer's responsibility to alert their employee that the fund is no longer receiving money. We would hope that that employee is aware that their fund has shut down. We hope.
You want the employee should. They receive a letter from their employer, or if they're from the super fund saying they're shutting down, or if they're the trustee of an SMSF that's become non-complying, they really should be aware, and they should inform the employer. But when it comes to the SG charge framework, that really doesn't come into it. The buck stops with the employer. And so if the employee doesn't give them the right details, they're going to have to keep taking action to try and get that from the employee.
So realistically, we're just looking to the employers to stay on top of their data, know when errors are happening, know when refunds are going back. And if they do happen to get a refund notification, realistically, the first place to go is your employee, right? And start talking to them about what might have gone wrong. Have they changed funds recently? Have they received any letters? Do they know of what's going on?
That's right. So hopefully the improved error messaging we were talking about is going to improve that the employer will have a better idea of what's gone wrong. And that will help them identify, do they need to go to the employee because the first name is wrong and it's been rejected? Or is it something else that's happened that might be on the employer's end that they've keyed something incorrectly?
What about, any other refund situations you can think of? One that springs to mind that is kind of an odd niche, but I can definitely see it happening, is you've employed someone from overseas and then in between payment periods, they've left the role and moved home and taken their super home with them. Do we know how that's going to work? Is that a really weird grey area that we're still not sure of yet?
Well, so there is the Departing Australia super payments process, which is through the ATO for that person to be able to take their super back overseas. From a employer perspective, however, they still have to pay that employee. So they have to pay it into that account. If that account has closed down because that employee's gone overseas and closed that account down, they are still going to have to pay it into another account to be able to meet their obligations.
Any other situations that you can think of that fit into a weird world of refunds? Refunds are probably going to be the biggest topic, right? That's the thing that people are going to get caught on the most.
I think the big thing with refunds is going to be changing scenarios of when they occur. So today, those super funds will try and correct it. And in a lot of cases, the super funds try not to refund contributions if they think they can fix it and allocate it to a member. But under Payday Super, suddenly those are going to be rejected instantly without a human really being involved in most cases. So I think a lot of employers might be surprised that suddenly they're getting refunded contributions when nothing has changed at their end. And what has really changed is that the super funds are no longer going to go out of their way to try and support employers to correct their data, because the way the regulations have been released does not give the super fund the ability and time to do that anymore.
So I think here's another key motivator for an employer to start that work now, making sure that they're going through the data that they already have in relation to all their employees and making sure that it's as up to date as possible, so that when they do get to this time frame, that they'll be much more confident that their data is going to be able to process and things are going to go through in a timely manner.
Okay. I'm a small business owner and I've never heard the words Payday Super. What would you tell me in 2 sentences or less to get me ready and focused for it? James, we'll start with you.
Don't wait till 1 July. I think that's the biggest change is people think, it's just about me changing my cadence. When I get to 1 July, I'll just pay super at the same time. But the changes are huge. This is the biggest change in super since 1992 when it was introduced. So you need to work out, how is it going to look like in your payroll? What is your clearinghouse timeframes? What payment method are you using? And what time does that payment method take to be received by the super fund or the clearinghouse? And do you know what your employees' current details are? There's going to be a big change in how super funds treat those contributions coming through that may not have perfect data. Today, super funds try and help the employer, maybe call them up. Hey, did you mean to give us this data? Do you have this person's proper name? That's not going to happen under Payday Super. It's going to get rejected. because the legislation's been changed that super funds now have 3 business days to reject contributions or allocate them. 3 business days is not enough time to contact an employer, get updated details. So a lot of them are just going to reject it outright. So check your people, your processes, and your governance of your current payroll and see, are you getting errors or warnings back from the clearinghouse today? Because they might turn into rejected contributions once it hits 1 July.
I think one of the really important things here is that it's the employer's responsibility to meet with the new changes and regulations. So it can't just rely on its payroll partner. It can't just rely on its clearinghouse. It can't just rely on its bank. It can't just rely on its accountant. Those people actually have to make good inquiries to make sure that their processes are working. And one of the things that I have had discussions with many employers about is educating themselves around this, having a checklist. And we have a checklist that we have on our website, which I think is very valuable for employer use, to be able to go through and look at all the challenges that they have and make sure they actually have a solution. Get involved with a trusted partner. It may be their accountant, it may be their super fund, it may be their clearinghouse, it may be anyone else in their business that they can trust to be able to get the right sort of advice so they're fully prepared and to do the things what James just said in relation to validating that they will be able to meet those very tight timeframe conditions now into the future.
That all sounds exhausting. And compliance fatigue is something that we're aware of, and we know that is going to be a challenge going forwards, is people constantly staying up to date. What are we doing to combat this? You know, what suggestions do we have to people to maybe make this a bit more receivable and not so heavy? And, you know, generally an email from the ATO is not a good thing. So what are we doing to make this a bit easier for people to consume?
I think probably the big thing is, if you're an employer who's worried and you've got that change fatigue of STP, it's constantly changing and super keeps changing, is that don't stick your head in the sand and don't try and do it yourself. There is resources out there. Your super fund can help you. So ART, we're putting out a lot of sort of webinars, help content, fact sheets to help employers understand. And on the Beam side, we're doing that too. The ATO has actually been really good this time with their sort of helpful content on their website. So there is a lot of help out there. Don't try and do it alone.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I think the ATO has been very proactive this time around in their messaging, coming out to remind, employers of what they need to do. It's something that is necessary, and it's just, I think the head in the sand thing is the most important thing. You have to actually do something actively. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to meet those tight timeframes.
So, I mean, to close, there is no grace period. There is no opportunity for you to just take a bit of time with this and change post 1 July. All of that has to happen now. All we can really push for right now is to try your best to meet these obligations as quickly as possible to the best of your ability, and things will probably work out for you. Is that fair?
I think so. I think you need to remember why this is happening. This isn't just the government wanting to mess with super again. This is about the member and their retirement. So we're expecting a 1.5% increase in a member's retirement income by the time they retire for an average 25-year-old today. So there is a reason for this. It is good. There's going to be a lot of change on employers. So maybe that's helped some people knowing that while this might be hard, there is resources out there. And in the end, this is going to be really good for the whole super system and for members.
Yeah, great. Anything to add?
Oh, look, it's absolutely the members' outcome. That's the benefit here. People getting access to, well, not access personally to their super, but making sure that their money's working hard so that when they do get to retirement, they've got hopefully a greater outcome as a result of these changes than what they would have pre these changes.
And I guess the final piece of the puzzle in all of this is the employees. What should they be doing as Payday Super comes up?
Well, so the employees, it's really all about them and their retirement income, right? But they're not going to see that for 30 years. So what they're going to see from the beginning is today you get your pay slip with the amount of super on it, but that's not actually the super going into your account. That's how much the employer owes. Under Payday, it should be what's going into your account. So they should be able to see that super more quickly. They should be able to see it on their super fund app in their member account. They should see it on the ATO website. It's going to be easier for them to track between have I been paid each pay.
Totally agree. I mean, it's something that people do need to get more engaged with their super now, and to be able to go through their apps and to make sure that the money's actually going into their account. That's one of one of the best things that they could do to make sure the employer is actually paying their super.
And if you want to help your employer out, make sure they've got your right name, date of birth, address, super fund details, so they're not going to come back as rejections from 1 July.
Thank you very much for joining us, both of you. Remember, if you do have any more burning questions, it's important to check the Australian Retirement Trust Payday Super Hub or the Beam Payday Super Hub. Check with the ATO resources. There's plenty out there. Or continue watching these podcasts because they're always a great way to learn more and hear from interesting people. Thank you for joining us. We'll look forward to speaking to you next time.